Hello patrons, and welcome to our very first tutorial. For those of you who signed up for tutorials, without knowing your individual skill levels in filmmaking or visual effects or animation, I'm not really sure what you guys prefer for me to cover, but I thought I'd start with something approachable and simple and hopefully useful to you, and that is a way to display and emphasize screen caps in a video. You see me do this a lot when I'm making fun of comments and things, or showing some piece of some website. It can be done in a very boring and ugly way by just plopping a big screenshot on a screen, or you can do some things to make it a little more cinematic and interesting and pleasing to the eye. So let's look at some techniques. First, we'll need something to show, so let's scroll through here and completely randomly just use some kind of comment, like let's say this one, right? In order to show this, we'll need to first save it as an image. On a PC, you can just press the print screen key. On a Mac here, I'll have to press Command, Option, Shift, and 3 at the same time. That'll take a little snapshot that's not saved anywhere, it's just in the clipboard in temporary memory. And now we'll actually go on to the tools we're going to use, which in this case are Adobe Photoshop and Adobe After Effects. And that's just something you're going to need to have. There are freeware sort of open source versions of these like GIMP instead of Photoshop, but I don't know how to use those. And it used to be very expensive, but now I think you can get all the Adobe programs individually for like a subscription, like $20 or something. So it's affordable. It's like having cable or something. Anyway, let's get started. In Photoshop, I'm going to press File, New, and because we have something in the clipboard that we screen capped, it's already set up the size and resolution for us. We'll say OK, and it creates this blank image. I'm going to press Command V to paste our screen cap into it, and then it creates it as a new layer here, but I don't need that, so I'm going to press Command E to just flatten everything into one flat image. You're going to see along the way that I'm a big fan of shortcuts. If there's a way to not go to a menu and just use a shortcut on the keyboard, I like to learn it, and I recommend that you do as well. So this is about ready. Maybe I'll press C for crop tool and just kind of crop out parts of the image that I know I'm just not going to need for sure. And press enter. And then Command S to save it. Save it as comment. Okay. And switch to After Effects. So in After Effects is where we're actually going to put together the animated shot. We're going to double click in the project window to load the comment picture that we just created. And before we can do anything with it, we need to create a composition, which is like an empty shot that this is going to be featured in. I'm going to click this icon here, where I can set the size, kind of like for a picture, but also the frame rate and the duration, which is how long it's going to be. 10 seconds at 24 frames per second is fine at 1280 by 720, which is a standard HD size. So here's our empty shot, and it's 10 seconds long. We take our comment picture and we drop it into the sequence so that it just plops into the center of the shot. As you can see here, it's a little bit bigger than our screen, which is great because it fills up the screen, and that's what we want. So what I'd like to do with this shot is to start literally like this, the way that we're looking at it, and then zoom in to this comment to really focus the viewer's attention. We're going to need to animate a kind of a push in by increasing the size of the picture. We're going to do that in the timeline by adjusting different properties of the layer. So just like in Photoshop, I can drag this thing to make it bigger or smaller, or I can move it around, or I can even rotate it, right? But as I do that, you can see that these numbers here change. So there's a kind of a mathematical value to everything. And if we, set this value to certain numbers at one point in time, and then to different numbers to a different point in time, then it changes over time and it starts to move. You get this. So I'm just going to reset everything. And one little cheat I like to do is move the anchor point. You see this little point here. This is the point around which the scaling and the rotation happens. But it's kind of in the middle of nowhere, and it doesn't really help us. So I'm going to press the Y key, which gives me the anchor point tool. And I'm going to move this point to the comment itself. So now, as we scale things or rotate, it's happening around the comment. And that's just going to make our life easier as we animate, because everything happens very naturally. So back to animating. I'm going to be in the very first frame. I'm going to click the stopwatch, this little icon, next to the position property and to the scale property. And this has created these two little diamonds here, which are the keyframes, which just means that whatever number this is, it's going to be that number no matter what on this, at this point in time, at frame 0. I'm going to go further in time, somewhere past the middle, and this is where our picture is going to be all the way zoomed in. So let's make that happen. Let's make it large by holding, I hold shift as I scale things, like in any program in the world that keeps things proportionate and doesn't distort the picture. And then I'm going to position it like this. If I really want to be perfect about it, I can press the apostrophe key, which is going to bring up this little overlay, and it has a crosshair in the very center of the frame, so I can kind of be like anal about it and make sure I've centered things, but I think it's fine. So that's where it's going to end up. Because we created keyframes at the beginning, it has automatically created new keyframes here where we changed values. So now there's already a motion that goes from the first position to the last position, and it lasts however long we went on in time for, which is 6 seconds at this point. So you can, if I drag across, I get the idea that there's a motion, but to see it in real time and to really feel the timing of it, I'll have to press 0 on the numeric keypad to render a little temporary preview, which, bam, shows us the motion as it's going to happen in the final video. You see how it stops there as it moved, and then it stops suddenly. That's very robotic and not very good looking. That's because the changes between the keyframes happen in a perfectly linear fashion. If I choose the scale property and turn on this motion graph here, you can see it as a sort of line, and it's a perfectly straight line that just goes like that and then stops. We don't want that. We want a natural start and end to the motion. So I'm going to highlight all the keyframes, and I'm going to press F9 to turn them into eased keyframes. If I go back to the motion graph for a second, you can see now it's not a straight line, it's a curve. So that means it starts out slowly and then goes into a normal speed and then slows down to a stop. Let's see that in motion. We start out moving, we push in, and we come to a natural stop. Perfect. So we're kind of already making the point that we need to make. Here's a bunch of comments. Look at this comment. This would be enough for most videos, and on a really bad day when I'm in a real hurry, I could just do this and be done with it. But let's see what we can do to make things a little bit more interesting looking. For one thing, I think it would be nice to have kind of a vignette. As I get closer, you can read things, and I don't want people reading this stuff or this. I really want them to think about this comment in the middle. So let's add a vignette. That's something you can do, on Instagram with a simple click of a button, but let's do it manually here so we have ultimate control. So to do a vignette, we're going to add another layer on top of the comments layer. And it's going to be an empty layer called an adjustment layer, which you can get from layer, new adjustment layer, or just press Command Alt Y to create this new adjustment layer. An adjustment layer is just kind of an empty cell that is not, it doesn't have anything, it doesn't exist, but you can apply effects to it, and they're going to affect what's under the layer, which is our picture. So the two effects that we're going to use are in the color correction section, the exposure effect, and in the blur and sharpen section, the fast blur. I'm going to take down the exposure, making things a little dimmer, and pull the gamma down to kind of give it more of a contrasty look. And then I'm going to raise the blurriness, and I'm going to check repeat edge pixels so that the blur doesn't recede toward the edge of the image, but goes all the way through. So this is how our vignette is going to look, but we certainly don't want to apply this to the entire image, so we need to mask away most of this. We can do that using the mask tools, and we're going to use an ellipse. We can draw an ellipse. But since we need it to be around the whole frame, you could just double click this icon, and it's going to draw as large an ellipse as it can fit into the frame. This is good, but it's backwards. So I'm going to go down here to the mask property that's appeared, and I'm going to change this add to subtract. So it's going to flip it around. I'm going to click this icon here to make the outline, the little handles that we have for the mask, go away so we see the real picture, how it's going to look. Let's open up some more properties on the mask, and increase feather, which is like the blurring of the edge. Let's increase it by a lot. And then we're going to decrease the expansion to kind of shrink the mask around the comment some more intensely. So let's play around with these values till we like what we see. This looks good, I think. So this is good for when we're zoomed into the comment, but when we're out, it's kind of weird. So what I'll do is I'll animate how apparent this effect is as the zoom happens. So I'm going to click the comments layer again, and I'm going to press the U key, which is going to just open the properties that have keyframes on them. Let's hold Shift and scroll to the last keyframes and snap right onto them. In the adjustment layer, I'm going to press T to open up the opacity property and click the stopwatch to add a keyframe to that. Press F9 to ease it. And then I'm going to go all the way to the beginning, and I'm going to decrease the opacity, maybe not all the way to 0, because even here, complete flatness and all that stark white is a little bit too ugly. So I'll add just a little bit of a presence for the vignette at the start, and then it's going to increase in tandem with the zoom. Another thing I want to do is just grab all these beginning keyframes and push them further in time a little bit. So maybe as we begin our shot, we're going to have a few moments to just look at this without any motion. And then it starts to move in, zoom in, and end up here. Maybe push this further so that it doesn't go too fast. So let's press 0 on the numeric keypad for another preview to see what we got. So we start out, and then we push in, and we really emphasize the comment with a vignette. So this is pretty much the way things often look in my videos when I'm emphasizing a comment. If I really want to make a point, as you saw in the example that I was showing at the beginning, I could sometimes underline things. So let's do that. For that, we're going to highlight the comment layer again, and we're going to use the pen tool, the shortcut for which is the G key. I'm going to click at the beginning of where the underline would happen, and then I'm going to hold Shift and click at the end so that it creates a perfectly horizontal line. I'm going to press V to go back to my normal move arrow tool. So right now this is just kind of a theoretical line that's not going to show up in the actual video if we render. But we're going to highlight the layer, and we're going to go to effects, and we're going to use the effect from the generate section called stroke. This isn't like the stroke in Photoshop, although you can find that effect here too. But this particular effect just looks for a mask. It's found this mask called mask 1, which is this line, and it creates like a color around it. You can't see it right now because it's set to white, but if I change this to like a bright color like red, there it is. You can adjust various aspects of it, like you can make the line thicker, and also you can adjust how close the line is drawn to the start and end points of the mask that you drew. So this is great because we can animate the end property like this through time and make it look like the line's being drawn on. So let's do that. It's going to start out completely at 0, but somewhere after the zoom starts to happen, we're going to add a keyframe to the end property. And now that I have done that in here in the effects controls, I can just highlight this comment layer again and press the U key to just reveal that keyframed property, to just keep things neat. Otherwise you'd have to like unfurl this whole thing and look for that. But no need to do that when you can just use the U key to just look at the channels you're animating. So there we're going to start the underline, and just before the zoom ends, somewhere over here, I'm going to take this all the way down to 100%. And because it's a line, it's like a pen has touched the paper, started drawing a line, and at a certain point just let the paper go. I don't really need to ease these keyframes. They could be perfectly linear. So let's press 0 again for another preview. And here we go. We start pushing in and we underline, and we come to a position at the end where it's perfectly clear, even to the most dim-witted individual, as to what they're supposed to be looking at and reading. So that's kind of my standard way of treating this kind of thing, screen cap. There are other ways, there are more elaborate ways. You can start getting into other things like making layers 3D and, you know, adjusting their rotation in cool ways. But let's save that for next time. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you can use this in your own work. and I'll see you in the next tutorial. Thanks.